I think he is the perfect complement to Derrick Henry. It's like Forrest Gump said, it's like peas and carrots, man. And believe me, this guy as a third down back.
Welcome into the Hot Read Podcast. I'm your host, Easton Freeze, Director of Published Content here at BroadwaySportsMedia.com. We're also brought to you by the 440 Podcast Network, and you can follow me on Twitter at Easton Freeze. Hope everybody's having a great Friday. Not joined by producer JT today. He'll be back next week, first thing Monday morning. But I am joined today by a very special guest, all episode long. His name is Junnie Riddle over at 102.5 The Game, local radio station here in town. Guy that I've become friends with in the past couple of weeks, and he's got some very interesting opinions on the Tennessee Titans, so much so that I thought, let's have him on the show and chat ball. I'd love to have some different perspectives on the show. I'm sure you guys get a little sick and tired from time to time of just hearing my and JT's opinions on this program. So bringing in some extra folks this summer to share some different opinions, maybe generate some debate, some discussion, change some minds. And so without further ado, let's get to my interview with Junnie Riddle from 102.5 The Game. All right, let's welcome into the Hot Read a first-time guest and a new friend of mine, Junnie Riddle from over at 102.5 The Game. Junnie, how are we doing, man? Thanks for coming on the show.
Dude, it's great to be here. Appreciate the invite. Glad to talk some shop with you and you guys. Love watching your show. So it's great to be on the Hot Reads podcast. We got to do this more often.
Hey, likewise. Absolutely. This is the first of, I'm sure, many appearances, and I appreciate you giving us the time. We're talking Titans, and it is we are nearing the heat death of the offseason. You know, we've got the last little breath of OTAs here, and then some mandatory minicamp, and then the wilderness is upon us. And you know as well as I do, the content creation gets a little tricky, and it gets a little finicky because I don't know if you've noticed, we are officially starting to dip our toes into the ridiculous grasping at straws territory for a lot of national writers and broadcasters. There's been a lot of very questionable headlines, very questionable stories that really aren't stories, kind of trying to make chicken salad out of chicken you know what this time of year, which you can understand, but it is annoying for people. And so we do our best to come up with things that are fresh and creative. And today we're going to kind of just get your perspective on some things. I know from listening to your show and following your takes on social media, I know that there's a number of things that you and I agree on. There's a couple of things that we disagree on. Maybe we can get into some of that today. But first, I wanted to maybe do a little bit of background on you. You're kind of new on the scene here in Nashville media, really rising up the ranks over there at 102.5, and you're on air more and more. People are starting to become familiar with who you are. But some folks may be wondering, where's this guy from? Where did he come from? So, Junnie, where did you come from? And how did you get to where you are now?
So I'm from Louisville, Kentucky, which is about, 2.5 hours north of here. I had family that lives in Clarksville. A few members of my family were stationed out at Fort Campbell. So, okay. Nashville has always been a place that has been kind of close to home, a home away from home, if you'd like to say. Right. And especially when it came down to deciding where I was going to go to college, I ended up starting at the University of Louisville, wanted to stay home, and wound up not liking it. And ended up transferring to Western Kentucky University, which is only about an hour north of Nashville. Went to school with a bunch of people from Nashville, started learning more about Nashville, coming down here and actually exploring the city more and more. And Western's known for its broadcasting department and right. media journalism in general. So I got a part of that, wound up graduating with a broadcasting degree, interned with a different station here locally in town, and wound up getting a full-time position with 102.5. And like you said, just working my way up through there, started covering the Titans in game last year, doing some written pieces on the team, going to training camp, and just trying to dive into as much of the team as I possibly can because, I grew up a lifelong NFL fan. It's my favorite thing to watch and cover. And through, I would say, almost 15 to 18 years of my life, that's been my number one passion, has been covering the league. So being down here and working with 102.5 and being able to really hone in on covering the Titans has been a privilege, and I've loved doing it and loved ever since moving down here and being in the Nashville market.
That's awesome. And we're on the same page there. It's been all NFL for me. And that's why you and I both enjoy covering the NFL, and why we both aren't awfully fond of this time of year. But a little bit of NFL stuff has come our way. The NFL's done a good job in the past 4 or 5 years of really scheduling out the calendar 365 days of the year, giving us a little morsel of something each and every week, except for when you really get to those dog days of June and July. And the past 2 weeks, it's been OTAs. Now, I saw you talking about this a little bit on social media yesterday, and a lot is made about it's May. These guys are in helmets and no pads. A lot of these guys, the younger guys, the rookies, it's their first foray into live NFL action. What matters and what doesn't? And I think it's something that people have very different opinions on for different reasons. What is your take on what you can actually take away from this time of year in outside training activities?
Well, the short answer is almost nothing, other than for those who actually show up and participate. I do think that that's important. The whole Traylon Burks story about him catching the flight that Paul Kaharski wrote about, I thought was awesome. And it kind of shows his dedication, especially with the narrative of him coming in out of shape and not being prepared for the NFL. I think stories like that are what you look for. But I think what you're kind of honing in on was my opinion about, the quarterback that was drafted in the second round this year, and Will Levis kind of struggling. Right. And I think, to kind of sum up my answer in general is, when do we talk about OTAs outside of OTAs going on? I mean, I'm sure other quarterbacks had bad days at OTAs that, no one ever remembers, because guess what? It really just doesn't matter.
I actually found an old article today from 2018, a Chiefs beat writer. The headline was, Patrick Mahomes throws 8 interceptions in 6 practices from May of his first season. And
there you go. And I mean, it's like, you took the time to actually look at that, but
who remembers that?
No one cares. No one cares. No. And the premise of it is that, this is the time of year, especially for a rookie that is unproven and is trying to figure his way into the league. It's better for him to make mistakes now and take chances in practice, to really trying to kind of find, his rhythm, find and hone in on his craft, because this is all brand new to him. New schemes, new defenses, new coverages. The speed of the game in general is just so much faster, and members of the secondary are so much talented on playing on the ball. It's like you want him to take chances now to really, kind of find and hone in on where he needs to be come August and September when the season starts to kick off. So I see this now as like, he had a really good rookie minicamp. He looked pretty solid last week in OTAs, and so what? He had a bad day. It's just, we need to quit looking at the narrative that this matters way too much, because it really doesn't. And so I look at it as, let Will Levis go out there, let him make mistakes, but you can't get too high on the pretty passes that you see in shorts, and you can't get too low on the bad passes in the shorts. That's where I see it.
No, I agree. I think that there are elements of it that do matter to the players, but in terms of a narrative standpoint, in terms of what fans should and shouldn't take away, I'm with you. This time of year is, and that you have to step back and consider what the objective for these young guys should be this time of year. And Ryan Tannehill at the podium yesterday was talking about making good mistakes. And you hear about that pretty often. This is the time of year when you want to be pushing those boundaries, when you want to be testing the waters and seeing what you can and can't get away with, learning by failing. You really don't learn a whole lot in life unless you are willing to take the risks and learn the hard way, right? And so I agree with you on that front. I tweeted this yesterday that we now have seen in 3 practices from Will Levis, a very good day, a very average day, and a bad day. And like you said, this time of year, I think it's important for people not to have the blinders on. I do think taking OTAs and mandatory minicamp and the May and June portion of football into account from a momentum standpoint matters a bit. Trying to look at it as a whole, but not having the blinders on one in particular practice, really focusing in on, he had a really bad day today. Like, that matters in the grand scheme of these 2 or 3 weeks when they're working and what they're working on and what they're accomplishing. So I think we're on the same front there. Let's talk a little bit about that player in question from yesterday's OTAs, Will Levis. I know you have come out with a pretty strong opinion on Will Levis in the grand scheme of what the Titans should be doing this season with him. And I want to kind of see, before I inject my thoughts or questions into this, I want to cede the floor to you. What is it that you think the Titans should be doing with Will Levis in 2023?
So let me start with the thought process that I had with some news that came out this week that really jolted this idea of mine. And that was the whole Jimmy G narrative with the Raiders, because, early in the offseason, especially, prior to the draft, people were looking at options of, are they going to move off Tannehill? Is Vrabel going to commit to Ryan Tannehill this season? And it was really kind of up in the air on whether or not he was. And so as free agency went on, as the draft has gone on, really all the options of where Ryan Tannehill could have gotten moved to really dried up. So with the whole narrative with Jimmy G and the Raiders and if he was going to play or not, the first thought that came into my head was, would they be interested in maybe, contacting Rand Carthon about the availability of Ryan Tannehill? And that kind of set in. It's like, why do I constantly think of this? And why is this narrative always getting put out there of how can we move off Ryan Tannehill and how can we move towards the future? And when I sit and think about it, I've been high on Will Levis. Before he got drafted here, I was high on him. He was my QB2 in this year's draft the whole way. Being from Kentucky, I'm not a Kentucky fan. I'm actually a Louisville fan. So
went to Louisville.
Actively rooted against Will Levis in college. And I'm sitting here telling you that I've watched enough Kentucky football to see the pros and to see the cons, and that the ability to mold this guy into a pretty solid to borderline elite quarterback is there in the making. And when I think about where the draft fell and how the division is looking, I look at guys like Anthony Richardson and CJ Stroud getting drafted in the top 3, and they're going to have fifth-year options, and they're more than likely going to be playing a huge chunk of this year. And I think that puts the Titans a bit at a disadvantage when you see the Jaguars, that they have their elite quarterback in Trevor Lawrence. The Colts and the Texans are going to be playing their rookies this year, getting them started, getting them reps, letting them go through their rookie struggles in order for them to develop and start becoming the franchise quarterbacks that they were drafted to do. I see it as, Ryan Tannehill being more of a middle-of-the-line quarterback. He's going to win you some games. He's not going to win you the big ones. He's more than likely not going to take you to where you want to go in the playoffs. I don't understand why necessarily the Titans fans and the media in general around here are not as open to getting Will Levis in sooner rather than later, so that, one, you can see that what you have, and two, that you're not behind the other rookie quarterbacks in your division, especially when you don't have that fifth-year option, which I think is important when it comes to, seeing the full development and the maturation of young quarterbacks.
So I completely disagree with this, but I do think in the grand scheme of discourse around the quarterback situation with the Titans and Ryan Tannehill and Will Levis, this is one of 2 acceptable takes. So I am not going to say that it is outright ridiculous, this idea. I think that the crux of the disagreement is where you see this team in their team building cycle. And so if you have this opinion, then I think that you see this team in their process long term at a different stage than they do, certainly, because there's I think that you would agree there's a discussion around what they should do, and then there's a completely different discussion around what they probably will do, right? And I maybe I'll just ask, do you see this idea as something that is actually a possibility in their eyes, or do you think it's more of a, this is what they should do, but I'd be surprised if they actually do it?
I think you hit the nail on the head. I don't think that's what they will do. I think that's more or less my opinion of what they should do. I see this also as an opportunity because through my show on Saturday, and I don't have the stats right now here in front of me, but I went through a lot of elite quarterbacks in the last 20, or not quarterbacks, running backs, I should say, in the last 20 years of running backs and how they start to fall off around this age. And Derrick Henry is at the age of 29, and he's going to be turning 30 at the tail end of this season in January of 24. And so we're likely looking at the last year that Derrick Henry, statistically speaking, unless he's an outlier, like we have seen like a Frank Gore and Adrian Peterson maybe, that this might be his last elite year. And for rookie quarterbacks, having an elite run game is really important to the development because it takes the pressure off of them. And I think that if you put Will Levis, I think having a guy like Derrick Henry to where that you're not going to be the focal point of the offense is going to help him kind of ease into it. You can kind of put it as this. Instead of putting the quarterback in, like having a CJ Stroud to where he's going to come in and the Texans are like, we need you to be our guy. I think him, like a Will Levis coming in with a Derrick Henry, it can be like, just don't mess it up for us. Take your time, let the game come to you, and take your shots when it's warranted. Because with the amount of stacked boxes that the Titans see when Derrick Henry is in the game, there are going to be opportunities for Will Levis to make plays. And so with that being said, I just see this team with Ryan Tannehill starting. I've gone through the schedule. I've made my schedule prediction as an 8-9 season. And I think when you're looking at a team that's, going to be middle of the road in a stacked AFC to where the talent discrepancy is very high. And I think the Titans, on paper are probably one of the worst teams in the AFC, and that they're going to get to that 8 wins because of Mike Vrabel, because of Derrick Henry, because of playing sound defense. But when it comes to it, with the amount of elite quarterbacks and some of these really ultra-stacked rosters in the AFC, I don't see this team making much noise in the postseason. So why not get the rookie in there and see what he has?
So let me present the counter argument here. And again, I think that there's validity to both sides of this coin. And it is really, I don't think that there's a correct answer. We certainly don't have enough data historically to back up whether or not you should go one of these two routes. We've seen it work both ways and we've seen it fail both ways. But the counter argument from a 10,000 foot view is sit Will Levis, let him learn and progress behind one of, in my opinion, two of the best, most similar comps to him already in the NFL. Coming out, I had him comped to Matthew Stafford as a more high-end guy, Ryan Tannehill as a more middle-of-the-road guy. If he can sit behind Ryan Tannehill, you go the route of Alex Smith and Patrick Mahomes, the way that they did that in Kansas City and allowed Patrick Mahomes to develop for a full year, even though I'm sure many of the people in the building at that time would tell you by week 4, by week 6, we knew that we had something special in Patrick Mahomes, and we could have thrown him out there, and he could have been just fine. If that's the route that they go, I think that there are some things about this team that justify doing that. The first of which is one of the easiest ways to ruin a rookie quarterback is to put them in a situation behind an offensive line where they're going to be set up to fail. We saw this firsthand with what the Titans had to do with Malik Willis last year. And I think that people are far too harsh on Malik Willis, who did not perform well last year. But my point to anybody who is really harsh on him is I don't think anybody besides a seasoned veteran like Ryan Tannehill put in that situation with that protection, with those weapons. I mean, I think back to the Kansas City game where he is running for his life every single play and throwing to guys you've never heard of all day long, and they still almost win an Arrowhead on Sunday Night Football. That circumstance is not going to work well for anybody that is not a seasoned pro. And I think it is if anything, a credit to the ability of a guy like Ryan Tannehill, even at his age, even with his limitations, to make something out of nothing. I'm not saying that this year's Titans offensive line is going to be that. I'm actually quite high on what Rand Carthon and the Titans front office has done with this offensive line. And I think that after this year, going forward, it's going to be a very solid unit. There is certainly some uncertainty to what it's going to look like this year. And I don't know what your opinion is on this new line and with Nicholas Petit-Frere being really the only returning guy. And then you've got 4 promising but brand new pieces with a lot of question marks. There is a reality in which, at least for the first half of this season, there's a lot of growing pains. There's some learning curves for some of the newer, younger guys on this offensive line. And just in terms of them meshing, them playing well together, it's really shaky. If that's the case, I don't know if I love that for Will Levis. Now, he's certainly used to it. If anybody that watched Kentucky football last year, they know that it's going to be hard for this line to protect him worse than his offensive line did last year. I mean, he kind of dealt with the same exact situation. 4 of the 5 starting offensive linemen at Kentucky before last season were taken in the NFL draft, and he was left with just 1 returner and then 4 guys that were new and inexperienced, and it led to a lot of scrambling and a lot of failed protection, and it caused a lot of things to go wrong for Will Levis, among which the injury that kept him hobbled for a lot of the year. Watching him so far at OTAs, and again, we've seen him 3 times. They're not in pads. It's all taken with a massive grain of salt. You see kind of 2 guys, or at least I see kind of 2 guys. And we talked about this on the show in our OTA review yesterday, that when he is able to set himself, plant, his mechanics are connected, his body is connected, the motion is fluid, he looks like an NFL caliber quarterback. And when you look at the best of his tape, that is what guys in the NFL saw. And the reason why he was considered a top 4 quarterback in this past draft, he's considered a guy that is probably going to work out in the NFL in the right circumstance. But we saw this a lot at Kentucky last year. When he's unable to set his feet, he's got a little bit of a happy feet tendency. He loves to throw from 10,000 different platforms. That causes a lot of accuracy issues and is really the primary knock on him. And the reason why, if anybody's pointing to him as somebody that's not going to work out in the NFL, there's your reason. He just does not have it from an accuracy standpoint. His mechanics are not up to snuff. And right now they are not. And we saw that the bad side of that coin yesterday at OTAs. Putting a guy with that profile into a circumstance where he may be on the run constantly or under pressure constantly or uncomfortable constantly this season, or at the very least at the beginning of this season, may not be the best idea. And here's my second point here. And Junnie, we may disagree on this, but I don't do schedule predictions this time of year just because so much can change. And I don't like to be definitive about a sport that one of the number one things I love about the NFL is the any given Sunday aspect, and how every single year there are teams we think will be awesome who suck, and teams that we think will suck that turn out to be awesome. You think about the Seattle Seahawks last year, were expected to be near dead last in the NFL, and then they're a playoff team with Geno Smith. Anything can happen, and that's among the things I love most about the NFL. So I don't like to be definitive, but I do like to talk in terms of ranges of outcome. And with some teams like the Chiefs, for example, I think that their range of outcomes is pretty narrow because their floor is just so high, right? With a team like the Titans this year, I think that the disagreement between fans and between those of us in the media comes from the fact that the range of outcomes for this team is really, really wide. And I think that some folks see this team as one that could truly be a top 5 draft pick next year. And then there are some that think this team is going to win at least 10 games. And because of that, and because there's so much uncertainty with this roster, and there's a lot of promise, there's a lot of projection that you can do with a lot of these guys. When you go player by player, there's a lot of promise on this team. We've just not seen it click yet. We've not seen it on the field yet. I actually don't think that range of outcome is as wide as people consider it to be. And my simple answer for that is this defense is going to be too good for them to be bad no matter what. That is my contention. You look at the defensive side of the ball. You look at who they have returning, practically everyone. You look at the couple of additions they've made. And yes, if you had to point to poke a hole in the defense, you would say there's a lot of depth issues. Okay, at safety, you've got 2, maybe 3 if Elijah Mold makes the transition, guys that you really trust. And beyond that, it's a bunch of lawn chairs and deck furniture. On the defensive line, same deal. You've got studs, but if they go down, there's a lot of question marks about who's behind them. But if this team stays healthy, and we know that's a massive if based on recent memory.
Very much so.
If this team stays healthy, which, I mean, a massive part of health is luck. So there's a big part of maybe they're due this year. And if it happens for a third straight year, maybe just burn the whole franchise down. Maybe it's just damned to hell. We need to just start over because there's a pox on this house. I don't think this defense is going to be, I think it's going to, worst case, remind you of some of those Steelers teams at the end of Big Ben's run, where it's like this offense is like 30th, 31st, 32nd in the league. It's unbearable to watch, but the defense is just too good for them not to be in games and for them not to win 7, 8, 9 games this year. What do you say to that?
So when it comes to the window, I am very much so in agreement with you. I think it's a lot more narrow than what people think because, certain local media members, see this team as an 11, potentially 12 win team. Like I have heard that. And I just personally don't think that they can reach that ceiling. For me, I think the floor is around the 6-7 win range. So I don't see them being as a top 5 and not even a top 10 pick. I think, their floor is basically where they finished this year.
So
around
we
7
agree
wins.
there. There's no way this team is so bad that they are in the Marvin Harrison Jr. Quarterback discussion next year.
We've already seen it. Like last year they were decimated with injuries, even on the defense, which was their strength. And the defense for the first half of the season last season was top 5, if not top 3 with the way that they were performing. They were putting up stats that, were similar to, what the 85 Bears were doing from a sack to an interception streak ratio. I think it was 3 sacks per game and interception every single game. So, they were doing things at a very elite level. And you brought up the Chiefs game. That was the sole reason they were in that game because, outside of tight end screen to Chigakonkwo, Malik Willis only had like 30-something yards in that game. So if the defense stays healthy, I believe that they can be top 10. Now, here's why I don't think that they are going to be in that elite range this year is inside linebacker concerns me. You had Zach Cunningham, which, again, he was injured for a lot of the season, but you're talking about losing David Long Jr. I was barring injury, like this guy is an ultra elite inside linebacker to me. The way that he could shift his hips, the way that he could evade oncoming blockers at the second level and go in there and make a tackle. And on top of that, like the Commanders game, the game stealing interception there on the goal line, getting in Travis Kelce's head against Kansas City, the plays that he can make in the passing game. He was just so versatile. And I believe that the loss of him and when Zach Cunningham was in there, he was a great run stuffer. And I believe that the inside linebacker position has been very undervalued the last couple of years with the way that the game has changed. But for me, I still see them as very versatile tools. And getting Azeez Al-Shaair, who wasn't a starter in San Francisco, and Monty Rice, who was a third-round pick from a few years ago, who has dealt with injuries as well, just doesn't really solidify it for me. And the number one thing about this defense that also concerns me is Harold Landry coming off his ACL and the expectations that people have for him. I get it. He tore his ACL last year in training camp, and he had the full season to recover and this entire offseason. But edge rushers and when it comes to ACLs, it is going to take a while. And he's fortunate that it happened at such a young age to where he can probably recoup from it and still have a couple of elite years. But for this season in particular, I just don't think that he's going to play at the ultra elite level and getting that double-digit sack range the way he did in 2021. So with all that being said, I still think there's going to be a few concerns on the defensive side.
I half agree with you on the Harold Landry front. I think that it is both fair to say no matter what in the year after an ACL, there should always be tempered expectations.
Yes.
But also it was, if there is such a thing, a best case ACL tear based on the timing and based on his age. So I think that you are right that you're probably going to see a hobbled, slower, less confident version of Harold Landry, at least to start the season. I think because of the timing, you may actually, because with a lot of these guys, you think back to Bud Dupree, you think back to Taylor Lewan for a lot of Titans fans in recent memory. And those guys, it was truly the entire season, save maybe the last 2 or 3 games in which you saw them really not be themselves the year after their ACL tear. I think with Harold Landry, because of the timing, you may see him return to form by the midpoint of the season. And it may result in a 7 or 8 sack season where he kind of makes up for it in the end. But wire to wire, I'm with you. I think day one Harold Landry expectations should be that of what you have expectations for any guy coming off of an ACL in that next season. We disagree a little bit on the potential ceiling for this team, and I want to get into the details on that because we're kind of on the same page with the defense. So the disconnect must be with the offense, and this is really where welcome to projection town. It is a lot of new pieces, it is a lot of moving pieces, and it is a lot of guys that, I mean, really from an offensive weapon standpoint, all three of the top three guys you're counting on to be the biggest impact this year are second-year players who two of the three dealt with pretty significant injuries last year in terms of how much time that they missed. Really, the only guy, I was talking to somebody at camp yesterday about what are our questions with each of these guys on the offense. And it's like, all right, Treylon Burks, we know that he's got it. There's a little bit of an injury concern there, not a huge one, but really the biggest question is, can he be that true bona fide wide receiver one? Can he handle the load of a stud top 10, top 15 receiver in the league the way that Titans fans and the team hope that he can? With Kyle Phillips, the only question is health. We know what he's capable of when he's healthy, but can he stay healthy? Then you get to Chigakonkwo, and it's like, I don't really have any questions about Chig. I think he's just going to ball this year. I think Chig's going to rock.
He's the most surefire thing on this offense, hands down.
He might be the only surefire thing on the offense. Is there any other offensive starter on this team where you're like, I have no questions about what they're going to be this year?
Derrick Henry. I still believe Derrick Henry is going to have a pretty good year this year. But outside of Derrick Henry, which is, for me, an absolute until he hits the age of 30, I would say
I'm with you. I'm on the Henry train until I'm on it until I see it come off the rails. You know what I mean? I recognize the advanced metrics. I recognize the stats, but if you're talking about an outlier, I'm not sure there's a better candidate for true outlier status in the league right now than Derrick Henry. So I'm with it until it's not there anymore.
So you brought up where you think we might disagree, and I think this is where it's going to lie. Okay. You are probably a lot higher on the offensive line than I am. Okay. I see a bunch of question marks on this offensive line. Nicholas Petit-Frere, he was a rookie, and I truly believe that offensive linemen don't hit their prime until they're in year at least 3 or 4.
Yeah,
but
I'm with you.
Nicholas Petit-Frere in general, I don't know if it was just because of how bad the rest of the offensive line was last year or if he was that bad, because I feel like he was a lot worse than what people were expecting him to be. And then Aaron Brewer, moving over to center. He hasn't started in the NFL as a center outside of that Green Bay game last year. And he played okay, but we also saw him get bullied a lot at offensive guard. And so our team's going to see that and look at the film from last year and put their big nose tackle and be like, all right, we just need to bull rush this guy because he just doesn't have the size and strength to be able to handle some of these big elite defensive linemen. And then when it comes to some of the new additions, Andre Dillard, former first-round pick with Philadelphia, and Daniel Brunskill. These guys were backups for two of the best offensive linemen or best offensive line units in the NFL last year in San Francisco and Philadelphia. Were they just a product of a bunch of talent being in one place? Or was it because they didn't live up to their expectations either? Brunskill's a guy that he started in 2020, in 2021 as well, but he lost his position last year as a starter, and he's looking for a fresh start because he lost his spot. And then for Andre Dillard, he was a first-round pick, wound up getting beat out by a 4th rounder, and he was just kind of the odd man out because of how talented the offensive line in Philadelphia was. So it's just, there's so many question marks for me to be definitive that these guys are going to come in and be just significantly better. I think they're going to be better because how can you possibly be much worse than the
Well, and that's what I want to talk about, right? Yeah. No, I think that there are two different ways to look at this. There is the way of what are they going to be in comparison to like league average this year? Let's look at them in a vacuum, this group. And when you look at it through that lens, there's a lot of question marks. I'm with you. I see a lot of potential for good and for bad. It is 5 guys, all of which you can make an argument for why they will be good and an argument for why they will be bad. And it's truly and this is bad media-ing, we don't know until we see it. So I don't have an answer for you. You know what I mean? But when you look through the lens of how will this line look in comparison to what the Titans had last year, let's kind of take it by sections. The left side of the line is the most glaring difference to me. While you could argue Andre Dillard and Peter Skoronski aren't going to be awesome out of the gate. There can be questions as to whether Andre Dillard can really hold down that left tackle position. Peter Skoronski, one of the most finished products in the draft, no doubt, but even still, like you mentioned, offensive lineman, it is one of the hardest learning curves from college to the NFL. He could stumble a little bit out of the gate. I frankly don't care when you look at what they're replacing, because I genuinely do not see a world in which Andre Dillard and Peter Skoronski are not a significant upgrade out of the gate over the combination of Brewer and Dennis Daly on the left side for the vast majority of last year. So that right there is an automatic day one upgrade to me. Now, is it going from horrendous to bad? Maybe, right? All of this is relative. But is it an upgrade over last year out of the gate? I genuinely think that it is 100% going to be. At the center position, it's going to be a downgrade out of the gate because Ben Jones was one of the best centers in the league. Even at his old age, outside of injury concerns, he was one of the best doing it. And while I think Aaron Brewer is much better at the center position, and while I think people are a little bit too low on Aaron Brewer because of, and I said this last year going into the season, and I wish I'd said it louder because frankly, it was the canary in the coal mine. We were talking about, all right, it's Taylor Lewan on the left tackle, and then it's Aaron Brewer at left guard. What's this going to look like? Brewer stepping in at guard for the first year as a starter. And my point was that I think Brewer is actually a really nice weapon to have in terms of a pulling guard, in terms of a guy that if you can get him to the second level in the run game, he's going to win against anybody every single time without a shadow of a doubt because he's a crazy athlete for his size and for his position. But in pass protection and in terms of working as a unit on the offensive line at the line of scrimmage, he has to be buoyed by guys to his left and to his right. He is a trailer, not a tractor. We talk about this with quarterbacks all the time, but I think it matters in this case as well. Who he had around him mattered a ton because of his deficiencies. And as soon as you saw it go from Taylor Lewan straight down the cliff, we're plummeting down to Dennis Daly. He just simply could not perform or succeed with that as the guy he was having to play in tandem with. And I think that because of that, and because of the fact that he's going to a position that is more natural to him, he's going to look better. Now again, if Brunskill to his right and Peter Skoronski to his left are no good, you might have some problems out of the gate for sure. That may kind of look like what it did last year, but I'm expecting them to be better than what he had last year. On the right side of the line, I think you make a good point in the sense that we see guys like Joe Thomas, for example, comes out. Or Logan Thomas, rather, the Giants tackle who, not Logan Thomas, he's a tight end. Whoever the Giants tackle is right now, something Thomas. Andrew Thomas. There it is.
Andrew Thomas. Yep.
Andrew Thomas. Too many Thomases. Andrew Thomas, out of the gate, really, really high-end prospect. Expected to be a stud tackle. Unbelievably bad his first year. Like, if you weren't a rookie and we didn't draft you first round, you'd have been cut mid-season bad. And now he's one of the top tackles in the league. Because he's in, like you mentioned, year 3, year 4, it really is a massive learning curve. And with NPF, I think people are too down on him in the sense that our last memory of him was the back half of the season. And in the back half of the season, it was certainly his worst half of the season. If you think back to our opinion of him before the bye last year, it was like, okay, for a third round tackle, which is kind of an oxymoron. Like, you really don't generally want a third round tackle, especially starting as a rookie. That's typically a recipe for disaster. Not bad, right? Not bad. And it got worse. And if you really zoom out, you can realize it got worse in direct correlation to the offensive line around him getting a lot worse. I mean, there were a number of games in November and December last year when he was playing on an offensive line without Taylor Lewan, without Ben Jones, and without Nate Davis. Not a great recipe for success for a guy that needs help at the tackle position. So again, there are some concerns from an athleticism standpoint, from a can you really be anything more than a league average tackle standpoint. I'm with you on that. but I just don't see how he doesn't improve this year over last year. Again, it's relative. He could go from really bad to bad, and it's still bad. It's still a problem. But will he improve? I think that he will. And so all of that is to say, I think the two lenses through which you look at this offensive line matter. And while it is fair to say there's a pretty decent chance in a vacuum in the grand scheme of this year's offensive lines, all 32 of them across the league, will this offensive line be at or near the bottom? It may be. But on the flip side of that coin, we saw what this team did last year with the offensive line that they had, which was tissue paper. Will it be better than that? And I think without a shadow of a doubt, it will be.
I definitely agree it will be better. But, a few weeks ago, Michelle and I on our show on Saturdays that you can listen on 102.5 from 9 to 11,
right,
that I came up with 10 questions that I had with this team. And I guess it's just more or less like it's the offensive line. It's the talent at receivers. It's who's going to be the kicker. Can when it comes down to a situation and there's a 45-plus yard field goal, like is somebody going to be able to knock it down?
Yes.
The secondary with Christian Fulton, is he going to stay healthy? He's supposed to be the number one corner on this team. Amani Hooker, is he going to be healthy? Kevin Bayard, he's getting a little bit.
Is he going to be around?
I definitely believe he's going to be around.
I think so too, but until it's resolved.
We'll see. That's the thing is, and I've heard TD talk about this, that he more or less thinks that it was brought up, it was a question, he said no, and they're going to move on.
And this is what I've heard as well. Yep.
And as of right now, maybe he's holding out on OTAs to make a bit of a statement. But again, it's OTAs. He will be there when things become mandatory.
At what point do you start to panic on Kevin Bayard? At what point?
Mandatory. If he's missing,
June 6th through 8th, if he's not there, then the alarms go off.
Yes.
Okay.
As of right now,
I agree.
The alarms are not going off. Listen, I was in the locker room last year and really start to get a feel for the guys, on the team, and I just feel like there's no better leader on this team than Kevin Bayard, and he's the heart and soul of that defense. What he did in the Cowboys game last year, I just think, speaks to just what this man is capable of
and how he by himself, just the whole thing.
I mean, he literally kept the Titans in that game. I mean, it should have been like 20 to 3 at halftime, and it wound up being 10-6. Purely because of his heart and not missing a game. He's going to take care of his body. He's going to be prepared. And I truly believe that, this is going to be water under the bridge. He's going to show up. He's going to be the same Kevin Bayard. But, back to the point that I was making, though.
Right.
I just see this team as that there's a lot of question marks. They got to stay healthy. I feel like everything really has to fall in line. And if the season's going to be a success, it's going to be them making the playoffs. And I feel like the only way that they make the playoffs in a stacked AFC is winning the South. And with Jacksonville and how much they've improved and how their rosters match up against each other, I really think that that's going to be a very, very tall task. And almost all the question marks are going to have to fall in the Titans' favor for them to have a chance to beat Jacksonville and win the division.
I'm with you on that front. I think that Jacksonville is the hurdle you have to successfully jump in order to get into the playoffs. And I do think in terms of scheduling, it could not have landed better for the worst case for the Titans would have been what happened for the Colts and the Titans last year, right? Getting them in like week 3 and week 6. They get Jacksonville at the end of the season this year. And that's good news for the Titans because there are so many different young guys, projections on this team, a lot of moving pieces that need time to mesh. That's probably going to give them the best shot possible. Let's talk before we get out of here. Let's move to the kind of this last point of what the Titans have in their weapons. And we talked about this at length the first time you and I met a couple of weeks ago. And I think that there's some interesting conversation to be had here. I was talking with some guys yesterday at OTAs just about what we see in this group. And in particular, Rhett Bryan of 104.5 and Titans Radio. We were having a discussion about people's perception of this team's weapons on offense and where we think that there's some unfairness going on there. And before I really go into my spiel that I kind of gave you the first time we met, I want to hear your thoughts on this team's weapons, receivers, running backs, and tight ends. Obviously, the general perception is it's not great. What are your thoughts?
So I feel like I'm a bit higher on them than most people. I don't think that they're going to be the worst set of weapons in the league. I mean, you have Derrick Henry. He's a top three running back, and the offense is obviously going to run through him. When Treylon Burks was drafted, even before the draft hit, and there were speculations that he was going to be one of the guys that they were going to try and go get in the first round, I was not high on him. I didn't like, his weight. I didn't like his speed. I looked at his route running percentages of how many different routes and how versatile his route tree was in college. And it flat out wasn't. Like, it was very simplistic routes. It was more or less him using his athleticism that he had to take advantage of college. Yes, very collegiate. But what I have heard from sources from you and also sources of my own is that he really kind of had a self realization of where he is and that he needs to take the bull by the horns this year. And from what I've seen, he has cut weight. He looks faster.
10,000%.
He looks twitchier. The cuts that he makes and his breaks seemed like a lot more fluid than it was last year. Him staying in Nashville and getting more adapted to the air quality here, with his own personal health, with the asthma, I thought was very important. And I just think his mentality and confidence is much higher. So I'm a lot higher on Treylon Burks with what I've seen. I had my speculations. I wanted him to come in and do what he has done this year, last year. But now that he's kind of getting into that, he's going to be the guy. There is no veteran like Robert Woods that's going to take away targets from him early on in the season. I think that he's going to have a good year. We talked about Chig earlier. Chig is probably the most surefire player on this team, all season long. The narrative around him was we need to get Chig Okonkwo the ball more. And yet he still had a really good season as a tight end, even though a lot of people in the media and the fans did not think that he was getting enough targets that he deserved based off of his play. So I think he's also going to have a good year. But my X factor, and I think you would agree with this as well, is Kyle Phillips. I mean, last year he blew me away in training camp with his shiftiness, his route running ability. I just think that he is built to play the slot position. He just reminds me of like a younger, more raw Hunter Renfrow. I just think if this guy is healthy, he's going to make plays. We saw it in the Giants game last year. He led the team in receptions and in yards. I truly believe with his connection that he had with Tannehill early on last season, if he can play the duration of the year, he is going to be solid. And I also look and think of the possibility that they might add to this as well in the receiving core. But a player that has gotten so much flack, and this is the last guy I'm going to bring up that I am super high on, is Tajay Spears. I think he is the perfect complement to Derrick Henry. It's like Forrest Gump said, it's like peas and carrots, man. And believe me, this guy as a third down back, a guy that can line up in the slot as receiver, his north to south, east to west range, his ability to really just turn up the speed on a dime, I think that he is going to be a weapon and a guy that's going to take away some of the touches from Derrick Henry, not put the full load on him, especially as he gets to that age. I think he's going to be used a lot more than what people expect. And again, I know the ACL not having it is a cause for concern, but I mean, when you saw the amount of touches that this guy had last year at Tulane and it didn't affect him whatsoever, I just have to have the belief that what he has shown us is what he is going to be. And if what he is going to be is what he showed us at Tulane, this guy is going to be an excellent running back too. And it was something that this team did not have on a consistent level last year with the injuries that Dontrell Hilliard had to deal with.
I agree with a lot of that. And where to start here? I think that on the just to get Chig out of the way, I'll say this and we know that the Titans are installing a new offense. We know that there's a lot of excitement around that offense. We know there's a lot of excitement in that building around Chig Okonkwo and his role in that offense. Without getting myself in trouble with Titans PR, I can say that from what we've seen so far, he's being utilized in a bigger way. And his utilization makes his designation as a tight end interesting. It makes it maybe in name only at times Chig Okonkwo the tight end. That's all I'll say on that front. But And I was to come back to my conversation with Brett Bryan yesterday. We were talking about how this team, I think, is suffering from in the general the general narrative around them and their weapons is suffering from the fact that people talk about receiving threats and they consider just receivers, right? And when you look at this team's receivers, you see one, maybe two guys in Treylon Burks and Kyle Phillips who you trust to be NFL caliber starting receivers. And then it's a lot of riffraff, right? It's a lot of lawn chairs and deck furniture that are being thrown to out there. Your NWIs and your Chris Moores and your Racing McMaths. But I think that people are looking at it in the wrong way, because you look at some of the best teams in the league and they're receiving threats. When you think about the receiving game of the Chiefs, the first guy you go to is Travis Kelce, right? It's not a receiver. When you think about the receiving game of the 49ers, the first two guys you go to are Christian McCaffrey, who's a running back, and Deebo Samuel, who's the most running back tight end-y receiver in the entire league. He's really only a receiver in name. He's a do-it-all positionless ball player.
And not to mention Kittle either. So, I mean,
and not to mention, yeah, exactly. Kittle's in that conversation as well. So my point being, I really think the top four, and I would take this to the bank. I mean, this is not a hot take, I don't think, by any stretch of the imagination. The top four receivers on this team this year are going to be Treylon Burks, Kyle Phillips, Chigakonkwo, and Tyjae Spears, and maybe a fifth Derrick Henry if they continue to utilize him in the passing game the way they've been utilizing him. So only two of those guys are receivers, yes. But that is a group of five offensive skill position players, five offensive weapons, threats in the receiving game that if you look at it, again, shifting perspective, looking at it through a different lens, that's a five I think you can rock and roll with. And is it going to be a top 5, top 10 unit in the league? Maybe not. That's a stretch. There are some crazy units out there. But is it going to be rock bottom like many continue to talk about them as potentially being? I really don't think so. And if you take that perception a step further, okay, if those are your top 4, top 5 receiving threats, if that makes NWI and Chris Moore and the guys of that ilk on this team and Josh Wiley, if that makes them receiving targets 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 instead of wide receiver 3, wide receiver 4, because again, that's how you look up the depth chart and you're like, okay, Chris Moore, wide receiver 3, NWI, wide receiver 2. And fans get nervous, and it's that induces anxiety. That is scary to look at that as your depth chart. But when you consider it from a receiving weapons perspective, and those guys are your 5th, 6th, 7th, 8th option on the team, I think it changes people's minds. Because what have people always said about NWI? Well, he'd be great as, a depth receiver. You'd like him on your team as your 5th or 6th option, the back end of your receiver depth. You just don't want him on the field to start. And unfortunately, the Titans have been putting him in positions to have to start, and people's expectations have simply been too high. Mike Vrabel talks about this all the time, trying to put his guys in positions to not have to do more than they're capable of doing. And that's what they've had to do with NWI. I think Chris Moore falls into the same basket. A lot of eye rolling around the acquisition of Chris Moore this offseason as the only free agent receiver brought in. But people don't realize that last year in Houston, on the island of misfit toys, with Davis Mills throwing to him, he had more receiving yards, not as receiver 1 on that team, than any Titans receiver did last year in a bad but somehow better situation. So he's going to be in a better situation this year. He's, I think, going to be expected. There's going to be less expected of him this year than last, because I do expect him to be that at worst 4th, 5th receiving option on the team. I think that people are going to be like, I kind of like Chris Moore. I kind of like the way that he's used. And as long as he's not on the field to start, I really don't mind him being on this team. So again, this is all looking at it from a, if you want to call it a devil's advocate standpoint, if you want to call it a glass half full standpoint, yes. That again, I'm leaving open I guess the reason I mentioned so little the ways that this could go horribly wrong for the Titans is because in the media space, there are more than enough people doing that for me already. That is already out there. So I'm trying to inject the bright side of the coin. And I really think that there is a bright side of this coin that is a real, not stretched possibility this year for this team.
And I think that's fair because you touched on it earlier, and I completely agree with you. There's teams every year that, you know, people think are going to suck, and they don't. And there's teams that people think that are going to be great, and they do suck. So I think Chris Moore's like last year was a bit of an outlier year for him. You look at his stats, his best year prior to that was in 2017, where he had 248 yards and 3 touchdowns. So my expectations for him aren't as high. I think, like you said, he was in a situation in Houston where they didn't have a lot of talent either. And I think he just kind of took advantage of that opportunity. So it's to be determined with him. But to the point of how, you know, majority of people see the Titans' weapons, I think they do underestimate them a little bit. My cause for concern for this team is with the offensive line, because I find that more important for a team. I'm totally of the mindset that you have to build a team through the trenches. So, but let me on
that. I think that's a bigger concern on offense when the vast majority think the concern is the weapons. I really think that if the offensive line clicks, this offense is going to be significantly better than the vast majority of people think that it's going to be.
I 100% agree. And there's one guy that I do want to make a quick hot take on. I think Colton Dow makes this team.
I'm with you. After yesterday, I walked away saying I think that he does. And on paper, it doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me for him to be a lock at this point, right? Like he's a guy that is really raw. He's got the size for it. He's got the athleticism for it, but you see him in practice and he makes a lot of 7th round rookie mistakes. But 3 times I've been to watch these practices in the past 3 weeks, and 3 times in a row, even with all the starters out there, this coaching staff continues to utilize him in a pretty significant way. And it's the vibe is that they really like the guy. Now, again, it's all relative, right? Like maybe they really like him for a 7th round rookie receiver. But I really do think they're going to keep him on this roster. And with his competition on the back end of the receiver chart, the Mason Kinseys and the Racey McMaths of the world, I think that he can compete there. I really think that he can. I don't think that is I think in terms of landing spots for him to make a roster in the league, maybe the Titans are the best.
With his relative athletic score that he's, you know, scored off the charts in with, you know, his size, strength, speed, he's got it all. And I just feel like even if he is the 4th or 5th receiver on the roster, you know, I feel like he can be a dog on special teams. And that's something that a lot of people are never going to touch about. It's not a sexy topic that people are going to tune in.
We don't care, Junnie. We don't care.
But special teams are important. And if you know, make big lapses on the special teams, then guess what? That can turn a tide in a game in the NFL. So, you know, him, you know, coming out probably isn't going to make a bunch of plays as a wide receiver in the catching game, but definitely could see him on special teams and trying to work his way up and make the roster that way with the natural intangibles that he does have. But to kind of conclude this conversation, Easton, is there's so many unknowns with this Titans team. And if that's going to be the story going into the season is, will the offensive line, you know, click this year? Will it be a significant, you know, more production than it was last year? Are these weapons going to live up to the hype that we seem to think that they have the potential to do? How is the quarterback position going to play out? Some of these, you know, pieces on defense, are they going to come in and step up and replace some of the players that they lost last year and be that elite defense that we saw in the first end of 2022? So many questions with this team. The potential is there for them to have a good year. Like I said, my way too early prediction is 8 wins. But, you know, the ceiling for this team could be 10, maybe 11 if it all falls into place. But the good thing is they play in the AFC South. If something were to happen with the Jacksonville Jaguars, you're right back there in that conversation. So it's a season of unknowns, and I think that is the anticipation that Titans fans are going to be looking forward to going into this year to see how this thing does actually play out.
So many question marks, could not agree more. And listen, that makes for easy work for guys like you and me. Plenty of content to be had and a lot of questions that we hope to answer over the next coming weeks. Junnie, tell the fine people where they can find all of your work.
You can always go and find us on any kind of podcast outlet, YouTube, Twitter, Facebook. We go live. Sometimes I fill in on the weekdays, but my show on a weekly basis is going to be Saturday mornings from 9 to 11 on 125 The Game. And again, you can watch us on our app. You can watch us streaming on all those outlets that I just mentioned. And if you can't catch us live, you can always go back and tune into the podcast.
Junnie, it's been a pleasure, my man. It's been great getting to know you. It's been great having you on the show. Hopefully this is the first of many appearances in the future, and we'll catch you around. Thank you for the time, and I'll talk to you soon.
Absolutely, Easton. Appreciate you letting me on.
All right, hope you guys enjoyed that interview with Junnie. He is really awesome. I'm sure he's going to become a guy you hear on this program from time to time going forward, and you might just hear me on his program over at 102.5 every once in a while, which should be exciting. Real quick, before you go, do me a quick favor. If you aren't subscribed to the show already, please do us a favor. And wherever you get your podcasts, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, hit that subscribe button. Go down to the bottom of the feed of this show. You'll find 5 stars. Just fill in that 5th one on the right and then write into the review box whatever you'd like to say. We would love to have you rate and review the show. Please help us grow the show. That's the best way that you can help us. Would be super, super helpful if you wouldn't mind doing that. And then go over to YouTube. Search Broadway Sports Media on YouTube. You'll find the Broadway Sports Media YouTube page where you can find the video version of all of these episodes. Hit subscribe over there and help us grow the YouTube channel. Those 2 things I would consider a personal favor. Thank you so much for doing that. We'll be back first thing Monday morning. No idea what we're going to talk about. Definitely Brett Kern, a little in memoriam for Brett Kern and his retirement at the end of this week. We'll get to that on Monday, and then whatever else we decide we want to talk about. Producer JT will be back. I will be back. We'll talk to you then. I'm going to go play some golf on this beautiful Friday afternoon. Hope you all have a great weekend. And until Monday, this has been the Hot Read Podcast. We'll talk to you then.